All right, fellas, let's get to the reason that we're doing this pod, the reason we're calling it a memory lane episode, and that is because we need to set this bracket field. We have compiled a list of 44 big wins for the Hokies since the year 2000, and we need to get to 32, a nice round number for the bracket, which we will play out on X, like Clark has done in the past with his helmet brackets, where people can vote on the two choices. And the goal is to have this done, all the seeds picked and set in March. So we can do a March Madness style bracket with the best wins since the year 2000 for the Hokies. And when I say best, that's in quotes because that term is subjective. It can mean different things to different people. It can mean most satisfying. And that's actually the way I termed it when I first put out the poll. Most satisfying win. It can be the most meaningful win, most impactful, most important, etc. Different definitions for different people. And that's what's going to make this fun. The opponent, their historical significance, how good they were that year, location of the game will factor in, the weather. I know that factors into a bunch of our games on these lists. Game style, how the game ended, the fourth quarter, overtime, all that stuff is going to play into all of our opinions on which of these wins were the quote unquote best. And so we're going to get this debate started with the bubble games. And what we need to do is we need to pick 4 of these 16 games. I'm going to add them to the screen if you're watching on YouTube. And once we pick these 4, that will set our 32 because we have 28 automatic qualifiers. Now I'll show you what those automatic qualifiers are later. So while you're looking at this bubble and we talk about these bubble games and you're like, hey, what about this game? What about this game? If you're thinking of a game, it's probably in the top 28. It's probably in there because me and Clark went through this with a fine-tooth comb to find the best games we could. Later in the show, we're going to be picking the 1 seeds from a short list of contenders. But for now, we are talking specifically about the games that are on the bubble. And there are 16 of them, as I've said. The first one was LSU in 2002, and the most recent bubble game was Tulane in 2023 when we won our Military Bowl to give us a winning season. And what I want to do is go around the room here and ask each one of you to talk about a game that jumps out to you. And Sam, let's start with your pick here.
Yeah, so I'll start off with my criteria for this. I had 3 sets of criteria that I gave score 1 to 5, and that just kind of helped me compartmentalize all of this. So I had how good was the opponent, or how important was the opponent? How big was the moment of the game? Was it national TV? Did we need the win? Was it a bowl game? And then the quality of play, like how well did Tech play in the game? Because there's some of the games on this list where both teams just kind of played like crap and somebody had to win the game. So, I wanted Tech to have played well in the game in order to like really earn the win. So putting all that together, score 1 through 5, and the number 1 game for me was the Clemson game of 2006. It was a Thursday night game on ESPN. Remember, this is pre-Thursday night NFL. So it was the only show in town, prime time, top 10 Clemson, CJ Spiller come to Blacksburg, and Tech dominates them. Brendan Orr runs for like 230 something yards. Tech wins 24-7. Dominant performance. And it was one of those games that really turned the season around. Tech had lost 2 games earlier in that year to Boston College and Georgia Tech. Didn't really have a big win other than that to start the year. So getting that win against Clemson on national TV, that really propelled this team. And, I think it was, looking back, it's really nice to see Tech beating that Clemson jersey. This is before Dabo Swinney comes in, so it's a little bit of revisionist history. But for me, big time top 10 opponent, primetime Thursday night game, and you played really, really well against a quality team. For me, out of all the games on this list, that's the winner.
Clemson
Clark,
was
do you want to
ranked in
expand
that
on
game,
that?
or Clemson was favored in that game. So it was one of the few times that Tech was the underdog on a Thursday night at home. I mean, that's unheard of. But I looked at these criteria, and so Sam had his criteria. Mine was just very simple. Was this the biggest win of the season? Was this game the one you circled? And Clemson 2006 fit that criteria. They beat Miami in the Orange Bowl in their last game at the Orange Bowl Stadium. They beat Wake Forest, who eventually won the ACC championship that year in Winston-Salem. But Clemson was ranked number 10. They had the 2-headed monster of CJ Spiller and James Davis. I mean, they were the good team of the league that year. And so Tech did a great job of stopping both those guys. They only had 71 yards rushing. Meanwhile, Brandon Orr just absolutely went off, especially in the third quarter. He had 2 touchdowns. I mean, they embarrassed Clemson, and Clemson was no slouch that year. They lost some other games by very close numbers, but I mean, this was the Thursday night game of the season. It was everybody had this game circled, and Tech took care of business. It was really a good win.
I also had this game in my top 4, and kind of to your point, Sam. If for those who was watching Virginia Tech that year and remembered like the 02 and 03 seasons where the middle of the season Virginia Tech lost 1, 2, maybe 3 games in a row, and then the season just fell off the rails. And 2006, it was kind of feeling like that. We lost those 2 games. I think there was like a middle game in between there against some low-ranked team that we were going to beat regardless. And so it was kind of people were asking like, is this going to happen again? Is the season just going to fall off the rails? And Brandon Orr, and 200 and some odd yards later said, nah, I got y'all, dog.
And this was back when Clemsoning was still a thing. And so even though we were unranked and they were coming in as a top 10 team, that was always like putting your head in the lion's mouth coming into Lane at that time. And they sure did. And we were responsible for their Clemsoning that season. That was the best rushing duo in the ACC. I think someone might have mentioned CJ Spiller and James Davis, but they had like, if you went to ESPN, you could still find it out there. It's a feature on those 2 guys, like leading up to the game. ESPN used to do a lot more of that, and it was a focus on those 2 gentlemen. And they ran for what, Clark? 71 yards combined?
Combined, yeah. And Brandon Orr ended up passing them during the game for the lead in the ACC rushing standings. I mean, it's crazy. This was the best team, in my opinion, that never won a conference championship. That 2006 team was just outstanding. I mean, they ended up beating the conference champion Wake Forest on their own field. I mean, it was the hard part about this is that this was the last time that Tech beat Clemson at home. The last 3 times that Clemson has come to Blacksburg, they walked away with the W. I think the memory of this game has faded a little bit. I mean, it's been 18 years since that game, but man, at the time that was a big time game. For sure.
It definitely was. And I guess I'm going to go to Devin next, though, because Devin, why don't you take a look at the list? And we got UVA 2021, JC's game. We got NC State 2010, the comeback. UVA 2005, when VT was painted on the field. The Texas A&M game in 02 down in College Station. What's a game from this bubble list that stands out to you?
Sam and Clark gave their reasoning. My reasoning is kind of a lot of the same, with one caveat of, and Clark's also been in the same shoes I have, where we've been to so many of these games. My opinion was definitely swung by just a straight up, how much did I have fun and how much fun did I have? So that, like, I tried to remove that as much as I could. There's a few instances where I was just like, no, I refuse. This game has to be in the bracket. I don't care what anybody else is going to vote for. Only because it's a great story when it comes to football families. NC State 2010. Okay. It's away. It's a game I did not go to because I had a fall wedding that I had to attend. And it's on the wedding was hosted, beautiful landscape. It was on a farm off of Catawba Road, going towards Roanoke.
What was the meal?
I know, really. This was 14 years ago, man.
I'm just busting your balls.
No, I mean, like you're joking, but I'm like trying to remember. It's probably there if I really think about it. But like, so we're there, and I can't remember what time the game was at. I think it was an afternoon, or I think it was like a 3 or 3:30 game. Because all right, cool. Because I make sure for the story. So the entire wedding party and all the guests are inside the house watching the first half of the game. All right, we're down and whatever. We get to halftime, and I want to add, this includes the bride. The bride is inside watching the game with us. Halftime starts. As soon as halftime begins, her stepmother runs into the house and just yells at us, "All right, everyone outside now. We're doing this." We run out. I mean, like, shotgun wedding, like boom, boom, boom. Where's the rings? I now pronounce you man and wife. Kiss the bride. All right, back inside. We made it in time for the second half kickoff. Bride is still in her dress, and we're watching Virginia Tech mount this big comeback. If I remember correctly, the very first play of the second half was David Wilson's kickoff return for a touchdown. It
was. Yep.
Mm-hmm. So we made it back in time, and we continued to watch the rest of the game in all of our wedding outfits. So that game just, again, it's not in my top 4, unfortunately, but just I always love telling people that story of just how insane we are when it comes to football at Virginia Tech.
I think that this game might be in my top 4 of these bubble games, the NC State game, because it was a 17-point comeback, because of the iconic kick return, because we beat Russell Wilson. And in that season, 2010, you guys remember how that started. It was a very depressing start to the season. We lost to Boise and JMU in dramatic fashion. And a loss in Raleigh might have tanked this season. And it looked like we were on our way to that loss. And so to get a victory on the road against Russell Wilson, against a ranked team, and preserve the perfect record in the ACC, which we finished with at 9-0, something that very few ACC teams have been able to accomplish, is a perfect 9-0 season with the title. I think that this game very well may be in my top 4, but I want to reserve judgment till we get to all the arguments.
It's in my top 4, I think. And also,
I put it at 6.
Michael Vick was
I'm not too
game.
far off.
Michael Vick made an appearance at this game.
Okay. Nice.
I remember. I oddly remember that for some reason.
I know he was at the 05 game for sure.
Yeah,
he was in the tech section in 05.
This is one of, like, oddly, I used to live in Raleigh, worked with a lot of NC State grads. Some of my best friends are NC State grads, and they were like, this is a game that they remember for, like, the wrong reasons.
Yep.
Because
I was living with a person from NC State at the time, and we're texting back and forth. She wasn't the biggest sports fan, but I think she texted me. I was like, it's not over yet. She was like, it's 17-0. Come on. And then we ended up winning.
I mean, because you got to think that was Russell. Like, they look back at the Russell Wilson years, but they didn't accomplish. This was the best team that they had with Russell Wilson. If they would have won this game, they would have been playing in a pretty meaningful bowl game and could have gotten 10 wins. So, yeah, it feels good to do that sometimes, you know?
So I was at this game. Some buddies and I went down, and the thing I remember was being down. Tech was throwing the ball a lot early, and they needed to run. They needed to run the ball. Tyrod was good running it. David Wilson had some good runs, but the defense finally stepped up. Jaron Hosley had an interception in the end zone that was going to lead that was going to let NC State have a 24-7 lead at halftime. But Hosley got the pick in the end zone that kind of stalled their momentum a little bit. And then the unique thing about NC State now is that they let the fans leave at halftime. So all the NC State fans, they're having a good time. They're enjoying. They're beating Virginia Tech and all this stuff. And so they all go out to tailgate at halftime. They're getting all their drinks. They got to work their way back in the stadium.
They're feeling good because they're crushing.
Right. And by the time they get back in the stadium, here goes David Wilson down the sideline. And it completely changed the game. Once David Wilson got that kickoff return to spark that second half, NC State had no shot. I mean, they really didn't. And it was a completely different game in the second half. I mean, it was just what the doctor ordered. And Tech just took off. I mean, I do not have this game in my top 4. NC State ended up going 9-4, which this was one of their better wins of the season for Tech, but there were bigger games in 2010 for sure.
Yep. And oh gosh, I lost it. I had something there. Clark, I'm going to ask you for your pick. If you're just like looking at these games, what jumps out to you?
So I had two top games, LSU in 2002, but to me, the number one game, just because of the straight emotion more than anything else, was UVA 2015. That was the must-win scenario for Frank Beamer in his last game, his last shot to get a bowl game to end on a good note against Virginia, who had their coach was on his way out, Mike London, and Tech figured out a way to come back 3 times in that game and won it. And there was not a dry eye in the Tech section. I mean, I remember watching Bud and Frank. You know, Bud was just in tears. Shane was in tears. I mean, that game to me will always be special, just because everybody knew, like, this was the shot that Frank. We don't want him going out on a bad note. We want him to beat UVA his last time, and he did. And man, just that day in Charlottesville will always stick out for me.
I think that's a great answer, Clark. And that one is in my top 4 currently. Beamer's final game against UVA, as you mentioned.
I mean, it was not a big game in terms of the records or anything like that, but it was
two objectively bad Virginia teams.
Oh yeah,
Virginia Tech.
Yeah,
I don't even remember what UVA records was, but Tech was 5-6.
UVA was 4-7 coming into that game.
Okay, yeah.
So it's all around the environment of that game. That game is second for me in my top 4. So I agree with you. I remember you talk about not a dry eye, not in the stands. There was one play where Trayvon, and I always forget how to pronounce his first name. Is it Chavin or Trayvon? But I think it's Trayvon. Trayvon McMillan had a play where he got stopped like for a modest 4 or 5 yard gain, and then him and the line just kept pushing. And it ended up being like he first got tackled by like 2 guys at the 5 yard gain. It ended up being like a 12, 13 yard gain. And I started like crying because I'm like, man, we've got to win this. Like, I care about nothing else. We just have to win.
It was a combination of it being for bowl eligibility, being against UVA, and being Frank Beamer's last game. I mean, and it was dramatic.
And by the way, during the game, it was leaked that Justin Fuente was going to be the next.
That's right. Yep. Yes, it was.
Yeah. Yep.
It came out like in the middle of the second quarter, and
right.
Like,
I was watching this on TV. I do remember when they said we're going to pause here for a second. Breaking news: Justin Fuente's been announced as the Tech football head coach. I do remember that.
Yeah.
And so you factor all those things in. No, the teams weren't good, but it is our rival, and the opponent matters in this best choosing. The margin of victory, I think, comes into play here. Whether it's super close or super blowout, I think that's kind of where we go with a lot of these choices. But I love that game. I love that choice. And I think, Clark, that was one of the ones you put on the list. And so I'm a big fan of that one. I guess
got a question for
Clark,
go ahead. Because when I remember I was mentioning to Clark, we're going to have some spicy takes here. You have LSU in your top 2 or 3.
Yes.
That LSU game's in my bottom like 4.
Really?
And so I'm curious. Yeah. So I'm curious why you rank that LSU game so high.
Okay. So like I said, when we were talking about Clemson, my criteria was at the end was this the biggest win of the season? So like for Virginia, I said yes. Wins that year were against teams with losing records, except for NC State. We beat them on a Friday night.
Which was a fun game I went to. Yeah.
Yeah. But this was Frank's last shot at Virginia. It was a big game. It was the biggest game. They got the bowl eligibility. They got to the Independence Bowl, ended up winning. But I think the UVA game was bigger than the bowl game, similar to what we had this year. I think the Virginia game was much bigger in terms of the context than the bowl game was. I mean, yeah, the bowl game was crazy. But what I said about LSU, I think the reason that the LSU game is lower on a lot of people's list is because that was a long time ago. that was 24 years ago, man. I was a senior in high school.
20, yeah.
And like I could say that, but if you look at my automatic I think I was 7. But if you look at my automatic qualifiers list, my top is packed by a lot of 04 and 03 and 07 games where I'm basically the same age. For me, the LSU game is like, I know how your criteria is saying that that's the biggest win of the year. That 02 team didn't have a lot of big wins. It had a lot of wins. And I found this out thanks to the site you gave me. We randomly had 13 regular season games that year.
Yeah.
Yes. How often does that happen?
It was technically Arkansas.
The Arkansas State game got added.
It was an exhibition game. Technically,
it was like the Hispanic Coaches Association game.
Wait, you're getting balloons.
You're getting balloons, whatever. I guess when you do air quotes. So to me, it's like I kind of a little bit of revisionist history. I feel like for that game as well, because yes, it's Nick Saban, but that's not the Saban that we know now, right? That's
LSU won the SEC championship the year before.
That was my point too, Devin. Is that yes, Clark, you are correct. The year before they won the Peach Bowl, they finished number 7 in the AP in 2001. So LSU was good, and during that game they were number 14, and that's meaningful, and it's LSU, which is a brand. But at that time, LSU was not LSU, and Saban was not Saban. They were just becoming LSU as we know them. They hadn't had a title since 1958. They were kind of not an afterthought. That's not the right way to put it, but Saban put them on the map, and he hadn't won a title yet. And so it was a big game. It looks way bigger in retrospect. It like that, and that's why I think people.
I was at that game. Yeah,
I was there.
I was at that game. I remember that was Kevin Jones's coming out party, if I remember correctly. He had like 2 really big runs. He had that crazy run.
Big reverse.
He goes right. Yep, the big reverse game. So that was like his coming out party. Like, and I'm not saying it wasn't a good win. Right. I wouldn't, I'm not snickering at the fact that it's on this list. I do think it was a good win, but I just don't hold it in that high of regard. It didn't bolster us into some next level. It didn't save an undefeated season. It was early. I think it was the second or third game of the year. Oh, it was technically the
second
first
game.
Right.
Second
technically
game,
the first, literally the second because of the Hispanic Coaches Classic. That LSU team ended up being 8-4. So it's not like we beat the Ohio State 2014 team that ends up winning the national championship that year. They won it the next year, I believe. Well, they shared it. I think that was the year they shared it.
Yeah,
right,
they
with
shared
USC.
it
with Oklahoma, right?
Oklahoma. Okay.
No, it was USC. I think it was
No, USC went back to back.
Yeah,
and
USC,
because they lost the 3-peat bid to Texas. But
and that's why they took the AP out of the BCS formula, because I think it was the AP refused to put USC not number 1. And then the BCS was like, "Oh, you're not going to do what we said you had to do." So they took the AP out and they brought in the Harris poll. I think that's how it went down, but
okay.
I could be misremembering. Another nugget about that 2002 LSU game was that after the game, there were so many LSU fans. There was kind of like a mini riot downtown. Yeah. Clark, do you remember that?
I remember vaguely, like it involved the Hokie bird. I don't know why I remember that, but LSU, their fans kind of took over the Price's Fork lot. Like that weekend, they were all over the Price's Fork lot because we had some friends that came in from Louisiana for that game. I mean, that was the largest crowd to ever see a game in the history of Lane Stadium up to that point.
Wow.
It was a brand new South End Zone complex, had just opened. So it was 65,632. It was the largest crowd to ever see a game. Now, obviously, it got surpassed a little bit since then. Or no, 65,049. The capacity is a little bit lower now, but it was the first SEC opponent to play in Lane Stadium since South Carolina in 1990.
That's wild, dude.
So and fans had this game circled. It was a big game.
And I said the thing about LSU not being LSU, but it doesn't mean that they didn't have a tremendous fan base who traveled like crazy. And,
it was nuts.
And boy, did they travel.
And
the whole top of the South End Zone was purple and gold. I mean, the whole place. It was crazy.
The other thing that we were saying, it was Saban's third season, and that they had been number 7, but they were just number 14 in this game, which is good. But we have to keep in mind where we were as a program. We were expected to win that game. This was not an upset like victory. Like this was business as usual, which is weird to think about now. That's another reason that it could be lower for some people. But when I posted this list online, like people were saying LSU has got to be in the bracket. LSU's got to be in the bracket. But I think some of that is just, as we've discussed, it's Saban, right? But Saban wasn't Saban then. And so
it's Saban, Jimbo Fisher, Will Muschamp, all were on that coaching staff. Like
it was
a legendary coaching staff.
That stretch to start the season. I mean, yes, they played Arkansas State, but they played LSU. They played Marshall with Byron Leftwich.
I was afraid to bring it up, but I would make the argument like I wouldn't be so sure that LSU was the biggest win because that Marshall team was good. Very good.
That was a big game. That was a very big game. It was one of my first games that I went to at Tech besides the LSU game, and people were fired up. I mean, it was a night game, and everyone was pumped for that Marshall game. That is not one of the games on the bubble. It's not one of the games in the automatic qualifier because there are so many good wins that we have had in the last 20 years that I want to move on to another one, guys. And I'll give mine right now. This is just one I want to bring up. Again, I'm not sure it's in my top 4, but the BC 2008 ACC championship game. That's right. We put a championship game on the bubble. And I think the reason for that is, at least for me, is that this game wasn't memorable. And I went to the game. I was in Tampa. I had driven down from DC and drove back in one day, 14 hours, to get home on Sunday or Monday, whatever it was. But it was an ugly game. We only had 234 yards of offense. BC turned it over 5 times. We had a scoop and score in typical Beamer ball fashion, and Tyrod had 3 total TDs. But ultimately, we had already beaten BC the year before in the ACC title game. That was a bigger one because it was the Matt Ryan revenge game. This one was kind of it was a championship, and it's great, and it led to the Cincinnati Orange Bowl that we won, but I don't know if it's one of our. It kind of almost de facto has to be a best win because it's a championship. But like I said, that's subjective, and it kind of depends on our definition of best.
Well, this was a contender for first, in my opinion. I said it was the second biggest just because there was the Nebraska road game, there was the Cincinnati Orange Bowl win. But I mean, yeah, the BC, even though BC was ranked and Tech wasn't, it just seemed like this was still a big win. It was a championship game, and Tech just went in there and just dominated.
Yeah, it's right between me. My 4 and 5.
This was the game that killed the ACC championship in Florida, which was one of the many wonderful moves made by the ACC in the mid-2000s.
It wasn't well attended.
No, it was not.
I was there.
I think for me, like,
it was very empty.
That wasn't a very good Boston College team. Like, they had a decent record, but they didn't really beat anybody that good. I just like, they beat Tech in that one game, and that was kind of their marquee win. But if you look at that roster and you look at those players, like that wasn't a very good Boston College team. Like Tech was underperforming that year up to that point. So for me, that one was just kind of meh. I don't know. It doesn't, for an ACC championship game, they're much better.
As Devon said, like there's a feel to it, right? And like there's just kind of a game that you think back on our history, like that's not one that anyone brought up. Everyone knows we won the ACC title, but they don't talk about the game. And I think if we could separate those two things, that's important. Devon, do you want to bring up another game on this list?
I only want to bring it up as an honorable mention. It's not on this list, and I honestly wouldn't vote for it if it was, but I just kind of want to give it's due. The 2007 East Carolina game was an absolute snooze fest of a game. Both teams did not play well because, quite frankly, they were so emotionally drained. But to say that win does not have a lot of meaning to Virginia Tech as a whole would be doing it a disservice. For a lot of Hokies, it was their first time back in Blacksburg. For a lot of students, it was their first time back on campus. Game day was there. Both teams come out together, no booing for the whole game. The game itself, I think the final score was like 17-10. But again, like I said, everybody was I remember just being emotionally drained. So I could only imagine how they felt. But so to me, just an honorable mention. It wouldn't have been, I would not have put it on the bracket, but just like a shout out to, like, that game just has a lot of important value to me. Fantastic shout out. Thank you for bringing that up. I was there for that one, and I was already graduated, but I had to make it back for that. And it was emotional, and it was great. Clark, do you want to bring up a game?
Well, going back to another emotional game in Charlottesville was the 2021 game against Virginia. Justin Fuente and Tech had parted ways at that point, and J.C. Price was the head coach. They were just trying to piece together the final 2 games of the season. They had lost to Miami on the road down there in Miami Gardens, I guess is where they play. But that team just gritted it out. And I know I hate to use that word, but that's what they did. Right?
Oh no. I thought we were done. I thought we got rid of it.
But it's funny because JC actually was like, I want that grit off the helmets. So they took the grit off and put the BT logo there. But that was a game that they just took from Virginia. And
that UVA team was good. Brennan Armstrong was that was at the peak of his powers. He was in contention for ACC Player of the Year or Offensive Player of the Year at least. That was a good UVA team.
And UVA thought they were going to win that game. They were all right, Tech is so low. This is their lowest point. They don't have a head coach. Everybody's going to leave. This is our shot to win. And Tech said, nope. We're taking this one too.
And in a lot of people's minds, that was the most recent game after 2019, because the 2020 game did happen, but that was a pandemic year. A lot of weird things happened. So for a lot of people, the most recent game was the 2019 UVA game where they won. So they were riding high and ready to, quote unquote, start their own streak.
And that ended up being Brocco Mendenhall's last game there as well. Mm-hmm. But the memorable moment from that game was that Tech had the lead. They were up, I think it was 3. Late in the game, probably the last 2 minutes, and UVA went all the way down the field. And then with a minute left, they called the 3rd down play where they ran the backwards pass to the lineman, to Bobby Haskins.
Yep.
And Tech just steamrolled him, took him down for
Dorian
a loss.
Strong.
And then the next play, it was just a pass to the middle of the back of the end zone, and Tech, got a hand on it, and the game was over. But
the quote,
it was cool.
Clark, the quote, right?
Oh yeah. So the cool thing is that now UVA just lets anybody walk out on the field after the game, kind of like Clemson does. And so all the Tech fans, they can't believe it. They're going to a bowl game. Everything was good. They'd beaten Virginia, and JC Price is out there, and it's his one win as coach at Tech. And he got the interview from Jen Heldreth from the ACC network. And he basically said the same thing. He was just like, this was a team that they didn't quit. They wanted to win this game. They fought all day long. And Jen asked him, well, Coach, you're a little emotional right now. And he just got real teared. And he said, this is my school. This is home. That's it. And that cemented the legend status of JC Price at that moment.
Sure
greatest one-win coach in college football.
You could watch that. It was on Twitter. It was on Facebook. It was everywhere. And you could just sit there and just watch that 20 seconds of quote over and over and over. And it never gets old, ever.
And then we got more pictures
about it. The great timing about it is right after the quote, they pan over to the students on the field, and there's a kid holding up a sign that says Lane Stadium North. You couldn't have drawn it up better. You had JC getting emotional, an all-time great quote, and then we just renamed their stadium.
Yeah, and that name has stuck because that was the first of 2 times we've stormed their field in the last few years. And we got the cigar smoking pictures that went.
Oh yeah,
they had him from the 90s, and then they had him from that game, and they mashed him up on Twitter and everything. That's a great choice and a great game to talk about. I want to bring up a game. Actually, Sam, you go first, and then I'll bring one up.
I'll bring one up. So a little bit into the more recent games. This was my senior year at Virginia Tech, and it was the opener against Florida State in 2018 Labor Day game. Florida State blacking out. They were doing the swag and surf before the game. That place looked insane. I've heard from people who went to that game.
It was crazy.
It was insane.
That was maybe the best college football environment they've ever been to. And these are people who have been to plenty of environments. And Tech just came out and mollywopped them. The game wasn't close. Like Tech could have scored like 38 in that game. They were running the ball most of the second half. Florida State only scored 3 points on a 22-yard field goal. Other than that, it was Tech had a block punt for a touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
That 50-yard pass to Eric Kuhn.
Yep.
I mean, it was just like that first drive was a dominant drive. Josh Jackson threw the fade to Damon Hazelton for the touchdown to cap that first drive.
Over a Virginia native. That a DB was from Virginia, and we wanted him bad, and he picked Florida State over us.
Yeah, when you said the term satisfying, like to me, of every game on this list, that was maybe the most satisfying because that was Virginia Tech is special this year. They are very, very good. It didn't really end up happening.
We had about that. The rest of the
season
didn't happen.
Oh boy,
the hurricane that happened, and then
the rest of the season didn't happen. I was at that game.
That moment was amazing.
So I was at that game. I think Clark, you were at that game too.
Yeah.
We showed up on I think Friday to Tallahassee, and the game was on Monday, and we didn't stop partying. We joke but seriously, it was a top 5 weekend of our lives, and. So the blocked punt, I almost knocked over my father in excitement. My father is a 5'11", 250-pound linebacker. And I about knocked him over just being so excited from that blocked punt. When that game was over and then we smashed William and Mary, I was convinced. You could not tell me otherwise that we were going to the playoffs. I was convinced. I was like, this team is legit because 2016 was our comeback from the doldrums of, Beamer retiring and is this new coach going to be good? 2017, it was a good year. We lost to Miami. No shame in that. That Miami team was really good that year. 2018, we come in. Florida State's ranked. We're ranked. We go in there, and like you said, like you were saying, Sam, they brought the blackout. They swag surfed. We had Monday night to ourselves. That game. That's my number one, actually. In my bubble 16, that game is my number one.
Really?
It's my number 3.
It was a top 5 weekend of my life. We had the whole gang there.
And it was it was shocking because we were underdogs. We had a lot of questions going in to that game. And once we won it in the style that we won it, everyone's like, Bud Foster just reloads. He hasn't lost a step. Fuente's got this team. We just come back and they're going to be all, and those narratives went out the window so quickly because Florida State was not good. However, that night,
but we didn't know that at the time.
Yeah, we didn't know.
That, in terms of satisfaction and a big win at the time, it's as big as they come because it is Florida State and it's in Tallahassee. And had we won in Tallahassee before?
1974.
Okay.
Oh my!
Was the last time they'd won in Tallahassee.
And
now,
so
granted, they didn't play every year.
Yeah.
But
true, yeah.
Tech and Florida State played a lot in the 70s.
And
60s,
even
70s.
in the early ACC days, like we beat Bowdoin in Lane Stadium, but that took a bunch of tries, and then we couldn't do it down there.
Florida State just had Tech's number. They just did.
Yeah.
Over the 20 years since the Sugar Bowl, Florida State just, for some reason, they beat Tech, and it just all turned on the tables on that night. I mean, it just completely shifted, and everybody in the stands, the players, the whole place, everybody knew, like, wow, this is a big time beatdown. It was national television, the whole 9 yards. But I mean, Willie Taggart, that was his first game, and then that all happened with Florida State.
Lethal simplicity.
That's right.
So I did look this up.
Simplicity. Oh my God.
It was the 20th most watched game of all of 2018. 5.5 million views watched us kick the tomahawk up and down the field. And I remember seeing a stat like 2 or 3 days later. 50% of Florida State's plays, all 50% of their offensive plays, either ended in an incompletion, a sack, a tackle for loss, or no gain. We were in control. Like Sam said, that game could have been a lot worse for them.
All right, guys, let's move to these last few games. I'm going to read them off, and then I want to see if anything strikes you that you need to say about these games. And these are the final bubble games we haven't mentioned. Pitt 2019, which was a 28-0 shutout in Bud's final game at Lane. Tulane 41-20 in the Military Bowl. Miami in 2016. 37-16. UVA in 2016, 52-10. You want to go, Sam?
Yeah, the Miami game was my number 2.
Oh, okay.
Maybe because it was a really fun day for me and my friends. I'll put it that way. Miami coming in with the Miami hype, and Tech dominated them in a way that was just so beautiful. Brad Kaya got sacked 10 times. It was incredible. Gerard Evans had that big run at the end of the game. Sam Rogers with the halfback pass.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
He was the lead. Sam Rogers threw a touchdown pass and was the leading receiver.
Yeah, he had that trick play.
Yep.
Yeah, it was
game
also
caught that
perfect game.
And that game also
perfect game.
The comeback of Virginia Tech in 2016, that was trying to reestablish our identity. One of our identities was the Kings of Thursday night. So getting back to, because I believe that game was a Thursday night game, right?
It was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So getting back to whole
It's
Virginia
also
Tech,
80 degrees in October. It was a beautiful day.
I think that's one of the
crazy.
best games Tech played under Justin Fuente, considering the opponent. That wasn't a great Miami team, but they were a good Miami team, right? Florida State ended up being terrible. Some of the other bigger wins under Justin Fuente, some of those UNC teams, they just weren't good.
Right.
And that was the game where played a good team, beat the tar out of them.
Tech had just come off that Syracuse loss too.
Oh,
so
yeah,
that really
the
stung.
Dome of Horrors. I hate
oh
that
my God.
dome.
That was awful.
Yeah.
Oh Lord.
I actually happened to see Clark before that Syracuse game. It's one of maybe the second time we had ever met each other.
Yeah.
But
first time was at Vail.
That's right. In Richmond at the Vail. But that Miami game, that Miami team that year, they had won 4 or 5 in a row. Then they lost 4 in a row. And I think they won 4 in a row. They were in a bad way. And I think we were partially responsible for that. But I remember about that 2016 Miami game, it being so incredibly loud, maybe the loudest I can personally remember, other than maybe the 03 Miami game.
Miami games are loud.
It's funny because in all the research I did for this, even Miami games that aren't on any of the lists, I was going back, the 2019 Miami game down in Miami with Hooker starting, like big game. The 2013 Miami game when they were number 14 down in Miami. Miami in 2010, like that game, they were number 24 on the road again, 31-17.
09,
but all the ones in 09. And some of these games, the 09 game's obviously going to be in the bracket, but like those other ones I just named, the 2013 game where we beat a number 11 Miami with Joshua Stanford and down in that like kind of messy field, like that game gets forgotten. Like that wasn't really a game anyone brought up.
That was the Trey Edmonds game, right?
Trey Edmonds, yep.
And that was our punter decking the punt returner and causing a fumble, which was like, I'm pretty sure was the SportsCenter top 1 play or a top 10 play that week. And I'm trying to remember the punter's name. AJ? Was it AJ Hughes? I think that was the punter. And I mean, decked him. It was a perfect forward tackle, head right on the ball, fumbled it. And everybody was like, wait, Beaver ball? Question mark, I guess.
And that's what's funny about the Miami Virginia Tech rivalry and why I'm so happy that it's now going to be back going forward is because as we go through this exercise in this episode and the future episode we're going to do where we see the teams, Miami comes up again and again, and we have played so many classic games against them. And so getting through the rest of these bubble games, we just talked about Miami 2016, UVA 2016, which clinched the Coastal Division. Justin Fuentes, big win to go to the ACC title game, 52-10. We beat them. I think that's tied or the biggest margin in the UVA Virginia Tech rivalry at 42 points. Even this year's, which was 55-17, it was the most points, but it wasn't the biggest margin. And so 52-10, it was a cool game and one that deserves mention, but maybe not a bracket worthy game. Marshall 2013, that triple overtime where we wore the digital camo, kind of an ugly game in multiple ways.
I've got horror stories about that game. Terrible stories. No, I don't want to see it. I hated those jerseys. I hated the helmets. Oh, Lord.
And then Marshall lost to Ohio. They lost to Ohio the game before.
That game in a bubble, it deserved to be mentioned just because it was the longest game in Lane Stadium history. But yes, I mean,
at the time,
yes, at the time. I mean, until,
So I do have one funny story that is funny about that game. So we scored, I think, to tie it at the end. We were on the way to score to tie it at the end. And Logan is on the other side of the field. We're sitting in the student section. And we're just going bananas because we just had a big gain. We're like, oh my God, we're actually going to pull this off. And Logan, like in the middle of the offensive formation, does a full 180, turns around and is just doing this to us to get us to shut up because we're just going crazy. It's raining. We're like so far gone from, whatever we were doing at the tailgates. I kind of feel bad. They ended up scoring. Thank God. I'd have felt terrible if they
they scored with 3 minutes left to tie that game up. To get it to overtime. And then it was just a messy game.
We need to talk about the Georgia Tech 2010 game quickly because that was a cool game. 28-21. David Wilson's kick return with 2 minutes left. I thought we were dead in the water, honestly. That was a home game, correct?
This was a Thursday night game.
It was a Thursday night home game. And even with that kickoff return, we were not out of rough water yet because our defense had just given up a touchdown. They had been on, and this was when Georgia Tech was running the triple option. So they had just been on the field dealing with the triple option. We immediately score again. So now they got to go back on the field. And that we were not out of water until Rock Carmichael got the interception in the end zone with like 10 or 15 seconds left. And then we could finally breathe a sigh of relief.
But I will say this about that kickoff return. That was the kind of play that you go back home after the game when you've gone there and you watch that play over and over and over again. I mean, it was absolute pandemonium. I don't think anybody saw David Wilson run into the end zone because they were all just celebrating so much. I mean, it was absolutely nuts. And that game was the grinded out Georgia Tech triple option crap that you just hated to watch. And somehow Tech was figuring out a way. And like you said, Devin, they still had to get that interception in the end zone to win the game. But that was one of the reasons why Georgia Tech, that game to me, was always the biggest rivalry in the ACC for Tech. It wasn't Miami. It wasn't UVA. That Georgia Tech game was the difference maker from 2004 to 2012.
It was.
Every year that team won the division. It was a must-win game. And to see Tech come back right there at the end of the game, and that just monumental play. I mean, to me, that play alone made this a contender to make it in there.
And if you watched that game and saw that play, you can still envision David Wilson like hopping after he scores, right? Like that imagery is just like burned into my brain.
I'm sure he did a backflip.
Yeah, I want to know who was in charge of Lane Stadium's soundboard at that time, because I believe that was the first time they played Inner Sandman during a game, right? Not during the intros. I believe that was the first time they busted out Inner Sandman in the middle of a game.
Interesting.
Because I've been to all the home games since, because Inner Sandman was first used in I think 2000. Clark, correct me if I'm wrong.
We got three left of the bubble games. UVA 2005. That's 52-14. That 52 number comes up again. That was the game where the T gets painted on the V in Scott Stadium, and it made ESPN and all that kind of stuff. Do you have any commentary on that game, Clark or Sam? Were you either of you guys at that game?
I was there, but Sam, if you want to go ahead.
No, I don't have much commentary on it.
I mean, Tech really doubled up. Tech doubled up UVA.
Oh yeah, we dominated.
It's one of one of those Tech UVA games that just like it happened, and like it happened how we thought it would, and it was in that stretch of like Tech just dominating that.
I mean, that was one of our best seasons we've ever had. That team was absolutely loaded.
The week before was the loss to Miami at home with College Game Day there, and Miami had just taken the upper hand in the Coastal Division. So there was really nothing at that point unless Miami ended up stumbling. Tech beat UVA. Miami lost to Georgia Tech.
They sure did.
And so because of that, Tech had taken it back. Now, this was not the last game of the season. They ended up playing Carolina
I noticed that when I was looking back. Yeah.
But it was still Virginia. And I remember when the T was painted on the field, I still think that was an inside job. I really do. I don't think that was any Tech fan or anybody that went out there.
You think they did that to fire themselves up?
That was Al Groh.
No,
somebody on that staff definitely did that. I
hope it was personally Al Groh.
It probably was.
With the wearing like a nice black hoodie and just have bought a can of orange spray paint from Home Depot.
And that was really the memorable moment from that game. I mean, Cedric Humes, he had just broken his arm like 2 weeks prior. He scored like 2 or 3 touchdowns in that game. I mean, it was an absolute domination on the field, especially on the ground.
A recurring theme that comes up against the Who's. Georgia Tech 2004 is on this bubble list. Another comeback against the Bees. This one was in Atlanta, and that was Reggie Ball. He was the quarterback for Georgia Tech
before they were triple option.
Now, this game was in my top 5.
Okay.
Georgia Tech 2004. So a little inside baseball. A friend of mine and I decided that we're going to drive down. This was our sophomore year. We're driving to Atlanta for the Thursday night game. And the morning of the game, his truck doesn't start.
Oh, no.
And we are like, oh, my God, we are not going to go. We've already got our tickets and everything. So long story short, we convinced another buddy of ours that had a Jeep. We're like, we'll buy your ticket to the game if you'll go. So because we want to go down to this game. It was a big road trip, ACC game. And he was like, no, I got to stay home and do laundry. We're like, come on, man. You want to go see Tech play or you want to do your laundry? So we convinced him to go down there. And in the first half of the game, Tech just couldn't get anything going. Brian Randall, Eddie Royal on that team, they could not get anything going. And at halftime, my mom called me on the phone and she says, Clark, it's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. Tech will figure out some way to make this a game. Don't worry about it. Don't let it get to you. And then by God, Tech ended up coming back. It was unbelievable, especially, to me, that play of the game when Brian Randall, it was like an 80-yard pass. Brian Randall found Eddie Royal on the right side of the field. He caught the pass, and Eddie Royal did Eddie Royal things. He made 2 guys miss, and he was gone. There was no question. And to me, he was a freshman, and Brian Randall, the savvy veteran, the leader of that team, just led that team back. The defense did their job. Chris Ellis ran Reggie Ball out of the back of the end zone. That we were in the end zone closest, or we were in the stands closest to that end zone. And because of the way that the end zone was so steep, we could not see the back of the end zone. we couldn't see the paint line. And all of a sudden the play was dead. And we're like, what just happened? And Reggie Ball had run out of the back of the end zone. Just,
oh my gosh. Yes.
And I mean, it just, to me, it was just an emotionally charged game. Tech came back and won. It propelled them to win the ACC. This did not fit my criteria as the biggest win of the season because they did end up beating Miami at the end of the year, which is, one of our top candidates. But man alive, that game started the rivalry between Tech and Georgia Tech because they had played in 1990. Georgia Tech had won the national championship that year, and they beat Tech 6-3. This was not a 6-3 game, but Tech was ranked. It was a Thursday night. It was cloudy. It kind of drizzled a little bit, but Tech they came back in that game, and to me, that was a big win.
Virginia Tech held a certain wide receiver from Georgia Tech to 4 receptions for only 51 yards.
Yeah, and I think he was a freshman too.
The Megatron.
Yeah.
You know what? I don't care who was thrown to him or that he was a freshman. If you can hold Calvin Johnson to 51 yards receiving, you're going to feel pretty good about. You're going to feel good about it.
Yeah. Yeah. We had the DBs back then that could actually compete with him. Although when he came back in, 2007, it didn't quite go that way.
Tech scored 22 points in the last 5 minutes of that ball game.
They did.
If I remember correctly, I was at a watch party in Blacksburg watching that game with a bunch of friends, and we were all panicking right at halftime, third quarter, and everybody was mad because we were running and you probably remember this game better, so remind me, because if I remember right, we were running the ball a lot in the third quarter despite losing. Yeah. And I remember my dad saying, "Nah, Devin, this is fine. We got it right where we want him." And I'm looking at him and I'm like 11 or 12 at the time. I'm like, "Man, you don't know what you're talking about. This old geezer." And then, like you said, all of a sudden, just bam, we hit like the 6-7 minute mark left in the fourth quarter and just poured it on them.
I mean, I remember, because we were in the end zone behind the play was developing in front of us, going away from us, that Eddie Royal play. And I remember just looking and seeing Eddie Royal wide open, and I just screamed, "Eddie Royal!" And about that time, Brian Randall tossed that ball to Eddie Royal, and he did the rest, and we were just going nuts. And then they got the 2-point conversion, and tied the game up. And then
there was a pick six, I think, in that game too.
Yeah. Yep. Very similar to the Ohio State game, the way that game finished. They got that pick six, and then it was over at that point.
Last game on the bubble list is Texas A&M from 2002. We went down to Kyle Field as part of a home and home, and we emerged victorious 13-3. This wasn't the prettiest game. A&M was ranked. They were number 19, and winning in Kyle Field shouldn't be slept on. Oh, this was at a time when A&M, while a big Texas university, they were A&M. They were not like a powerhouse pre Johnny Manziel, pre a lot of that big booster money that came in. Good win, tough place to win. I don't think it's one of the top games on this bubble list.
Yeah, it was not a notable remembering game, but the fact that Tech had the home and home set up with Texas A&M, it was very similar to the way fans felt about the Nebraska series, fans felt about the LSU series, was that it's like, we're playing big time Texas A&M. Tech had not gone to Texas to play a road game since 1976, and that was at Texas A&M. But Texas A&M didn't lose non-conference games at all. They had a 29-game home winning streak against non-conference. The last time, so this game happened in 2002. The last time they had lost a non-conference game was to Washington in 1989.
But I'm also guessing they didn't play a lot of top-notch teams out of conference at home.
I'm sure they did. I didn't look at
one or two a year, probably.
Here's what I would venture to guess. When they scheduled that game, Tech was not the Tech that they got because we had really built up our program by the time 2002 had rolled around. And you know how far back the scheduling goes. But regardless, very nice win. I remember it being a big win, but I don't think it's going to be on any of our top four lists.
This was the only game in our list that I did not go to. So
that's incredible.
I don't really have
that is
many,
absolutely incredible.
I don't have many memories from that game, but I do remember that being it was a big series. And I think that's why that game is on the list. Obviously, the Hurricane Isabel game from 2003 is in our bracket, but
very memorable.
That series was just very memorable. Tech had played 3 ranked teams in a row, and they beat all 3 of them, and that was a memorable game. Lee Suggs got a touchdown in that game to extend his streak. So that deserves to be mentioned as well, for sure.
Texas A&M and Tennessee are the 2 teams that I wish, if I was college football commissioner, that I wish Virginia Tech would play regularly. And Texas A&M for the reason of both of us have
core cadets.
The core cadet tradition. I really wish, like, I'm sure you of course couldn't do a home and home every single year, but I really wish, like, once every 4 or 5 years, they made their way up here. We went down there just because of the tradition around the core cadets for the 2 universities. I'm holding out hope that the 12-team playoff means that we'll see more out of conference Power 5 matchups, home and home. I'm skeptical, but I
Tech didn't have many of those at the time.
Mm-hmm. And then Frank scheduled a ton of them, or Weaver or whoever, because we played a lot of big teams that.
Well, before they were in the ACC, I will say this: before they were in the ACC, Tech had home and homes with Clemson lined up, North Carolina lined up, NC State lined up. Like, they were going to play ACC teams primarily in those Power 5 matchups. But once they joined the league, it's like, we gotta have some schools that aren't in the ACC now. Do we want to continue to play Syracuse and West Virginia? They played West Virginia for 2 more years after they joined the ACC, and both of those games are on our list.
Yep.
But that Texas A&M series it felt big. The LSU series felt big, even though they won one of those. And then, the Nebraska series, that was big time.
Yep.
Yeah. Let's hold that thought for now. I'm going to give a couple honorable mentions. I said 2013 Miami, 2019 Miami, 2010 Miami. These are all games that are not in the automatic qualifiers, but I think deserve to mention and could have been on the bubble 16. But if you guys think that any of these games that I'm mentioning now are better than the 4 that you picked out of the bubble, I'd be shocked. Pitt 2016, when Gerard and the receivers went crazy and we won 39-36. That was a pretty cool game. And it was part of a good season. I'm not sure it has anything to hold a candle to like a 2006 Clemson, but it was a good game. ECU 2016, 54-17 as a little bit of payback for the times that they got the better of us. Josh Jackson was nuclear that game. Cam Phillips broke the record for most receptions, I want to say, or
was that the game where Tommy Tuberville was closing us out? Was that game?
Which game am I thinking of?
It was at ECU and Cam Phillips had 14 receptions.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. But the 2016 game with Gerard running down the field and cutting back and scoring, that was really cool. And then BC 2016, that 2016 year had some cool games. 49-0 over Boston College, a team that has historically given us some problems. Just thought that was kind of a wild result.
That was a beatdown. Yeah.
That was.
Okay,
so let's pick our 4.
We got to vote on the 4. We got to get this bubble done with. Remove the bubble. Get the 32 team bracket set. So, is it safe to assume that we're all putting Clemson 2006 into the bracket? Okay.
Yes,
I have that. Yes.
All right. Can we nominate NC State for addition to the bracket? NC State 2010. I would say that it's in.
I got it in there.
What about you two?
They are right. They are.
I do not have it in there.
They are right at the 5-6 line. So if I could see them moving up, depending on how the rest of this goes, but they're right at the line for me.
All right.
So my criteria was this the biggest win of the season?
Mm-hmm.
And I said no. At the time it was, but NC State ended up 9-4. So the win was one of the better ones of the season, but the ACC title game was bigger for sure.
And that's in our AQ, I believe, as well.
That is in our AQ. And seasons can have more than one game in the bracket. And so, but we'll put that on the back burner for now. 2 of us think it's in. Devin's on the fence, whatever. LSU 2002. Do either of you guys think this should be in the bracket?
I vote that in.
I don't have it.
I don't have it.
I think
I was also 5, so don't listen to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I'm the outlier on the LSU one.
I think it should be in.
I think it should be as well.
Clark thinks
it was a big time game.
That's about tied with NC State right now. And give me a nomination, Devin.
The 2015 Beamer's emotional win in Whoville. I think that has to be in there.
I think that has to be in there. I think
100%.
Sam, where are you at on that?
I don't have it, but I'll concede it. For me, UVA just like wasn't a good team. But the circumstances around that game. Yeah. And then I also think like celebrating one of the most legendary coaches in the sport while also like hiring a dude from Memphis in the same game is almost like college football lore beyond Virginia Tech. Like people know that outside of Virginia Tech that broke in the middle of the game.
And I know it ended up like in hindsight, yes, it was a dud. At the time, you read all the articles, ESPN, Athlon, etc. Everyone thought that was a genius hire. Yeah. At the time, we thought we knocked it out the park. And like
I didn't like that they announced it during the game, though.
Oh, that part, yeah.
It got leaked.
That didn't need to happen,
didn't it?
That didn't need to happen.
Sure,
I do agree with that.
Yeah,
I think it was
somebody there leaked.
Back on track, fellas. Yeah. The BC 2008 ACC title game. Does that need to be in the bracket?
Not for me. It's not my top 4.
Mm-mm.
I don't think it does either.
I starred it. It was the second biggest win of the season. So I starred that one. I said it was for a title. I mean, let's be honest. It's for the ACC championship. Yes, BC was ranked ahead.
God, this is hard, man.
But the game just didn't have a big championship feel because it was Boston College and it was in Tampa.
All right. So that one or down. Florida State 2018.
Yeah. So
Go ahead.
No, where are you at on that, Devon?
That's my number 1. And again, I 100% recognize the bias. I think Sam and I are in the same boat. Just personal bias for that game was it was a blast.
Kirk Herbstreit was beside himself after that game.
I remember that. I do remember that. What a day. What a weekend.
I think a lot of fans would agree with you, especially fans that are closer to, because I think me and Clark are pretty close in our years at Tech, and then you guys are a little bit closer to each other.
Dev's been going to games for a long time.
And Sam grew up a Hokie fan, so he's been a fan since his whole life. So
the microcosm of that game, I think, might be the best on this list.
All right, we have two,
and that's the same argument you can make with LSU.
Also
right?
true, yeah.
That team didn't win a conference championship. It kind of had a rough season, but the LSU game in a bubble was a big game.
Here's what we're going to do. Clemson 2006 is in. UVA 2015 is in. The next 4 games that we're kind of on the fence about: FSU 2018, NC State 2010, LSU 2002, ACC championship game 2008. Because I think I know Sam mentioned the 2016 Miami game was really big. For me, that's not like that's maybe a more personal one for him. For me, it's not in the top 4. I don't think either of you guys had it in your top 4.
I didn't.
But I wanted to make sure we just caveated that and mentioned it. So can we agree that the FSU, NC State, LSU, and ACC championship game are the only ones we're considering?
Sure.
Still at this point. Okay.
Yep.
Now here's what we're going to do. If we need the ACC championship game in there, I think kind of like it's a title game. I could lean more towards Clark and put it in. Where are you guys still a no on that?
Looking at it from a euphoria standpoint, and I know I hate to say this, but the euphoria of beating Florida State on that Labor Day night exceeded the euphoria of beating Boston College in the ACC title.
All right, that seals it. We're putting 2018 FSU in. All right, that leaves one spot left for NC State, LSU, and ACC championship game. At least one spot for now, because I think 2 of these got to get in there. I really do.
I would concede the NC State game because I have a lot of personal bias on that game. It was a good game to watch. Was it the largest comeback Tech had at the time?
At the time, 17 points.
Yes. At the time, so like there's a lot of historical
largest comeback under Beamer
reference around that, obviously until the Arkansas game for the Belk Bowl. So I would be fine with that being the 4 seed.
Here's what I'm going to ask you, because if we agree that LSU or the championship game are next after the FSU game, here are our automatic qualifiers. And there's a lot of games on this list. I'm going to reference 3 of them. 1, the Tennessee 2009 Peach Bowl. Is the Tennessee 2009 Peach Bowl as good of a choice as the LSU game? Is the Texas A&M 2003 game, monsoon game in Lane, as good as the LSU game?
Yes. Texas A&M 2003 has to be in there.
Okay.
Period.
Okay, that's fine. That's why it's an automatic qualifier.
Yes.
And then there was one more. Oh, the 2008 Nebraska game in Lincoln. Is that better than the LSU win over Saban?
So that 2008 game was the largest game at Memorial Stadium in Lincoln.
Yeah.
And I believe it might still be the largest attended game. And the largest attended game at a Nebraska game is something special. And that was an ABC Saturday night game.
That was a great series.
Special.
That's some good context, but this is the point I'm going with here. These were the automatic qualifiers for very, very many reasons. And so if we felt that we could drop that Peach Bowl, because I feel like that's the one that's on the chopping block. Very cool game. 2009 was a fun year, and to beat Tennessee on New Year's Eve was awesome. But I think the LSU game or the ACC championship game has to be in over that.
I disagree.
Okay.
Back to a point I was making about if I could choose a common opponent for Tech to have, one of them would be Tennessee. Beating up on Tennessee was a highlight of my year.
Oh, especially that second half. Oh man. Yeah. Lane Kiffin, Tennessee too.
This is so impossible.
The Tyrod Taylor Hail Mary.
He put his starters back in to try to save face because it was a blowout. We dominated the second half. He put his starters back in, ended up getting his quarterback hurt. Yeah,
you guys are looking at the same list I'm looking at. Our 28 automatic qualifiers. Are any of these games, take a quick look, removable from the automatic qualifier? And there's things like the WV, for our listeners, 2017 WVU, Clemson 2007, when Beamer Ball went crazy down there, UVA 2007 with the Coastal on the line. Cincinnati Orange Bowl, Nebraska 09. Obviously, that's in contention for one of our best games. There's so many games. So what this is my point. I'm removing the automatic qualifiers from the screen at this point. The Perkins fumble and the OT win against UVA in 2018, that could potentially be on the chopping block. But
that was not a major game, but yes, it deserved.
It was a great game.
It was like the Nebraska game in 09.
Yeah.
The end of that game made it the game.
We need to make a decision. I think the ACC championship game in 2008 is getting left off. That's what I think, and I think LSU should be in.
I would vote for that as well, only because Tech just handled BC, and it didn't feel like a championship atmosphere.
And that's what we have to remove. It's the best game, not the. It doesn't have to be what it meant.
LSU was jam friggin' packed.
LSU was
new
more satisfying.
New South end zone. The stadium was large. All the LSU fans.
I'll be in the minority on this one. When Clark puts it up on X, I'll be the lone vote.
And Devin, I'm not trying to I'm definitely not trying to diminish your opinion. But
no.
In combination with everything we talked about tonight and what I saw as the responses online, I think LSU 2002 has to be in. And so I think we're done. I think we got Clemson 2006, we got UVA 2015, we got FSU 2018, and we got LSU 2002. And that's what we chose from our bubble games. Whew. All right, guys.
I starred 3 games before we started. It was Virginia 15, Clemson 06, and LSU 02. So I got all 3 the ones I wanted.
I got 3 of mine as well. So
let me see. I got 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. I got 3 of mine. Yep.
This is our school. This is my school. This is home. Shout out to JC.
Okay.
What a game.
Let's take a quick break to talk about our sponsor and maybe just have a sip of beer before we talk about our 1 seeds. The Too Deep Hokies Under the Influence podcast is brought to you by Roback. Roback is the performance activewear designed for those who crave activity. It's the polo company that brought you the VT Polo, the maroon one with the tiny orange Virginias that everyone was wearing, and then the white one with the maroon Virginias that even more people had, known as the Commonwealth. And they also have the Berg, which is the 2-tone quarter zip, and it's a great look. Right now, they're offering our listeners 20% off their order using code 2DVT. That's their first order. So use your work email, get a second order, get that 20% off. They got women's stuff. My wife loves their women's stuff. It's super comfortable. Tennis skirts, hoodies, Q-zips, shorts, joggers, all of it. And of course, the polos, they're coming out with new designs every day. So go to their site, load up your cart, use code 2DEEPVT for 20% off your order. Roback Crave Activity. Contenders for the 1 seeds. Let's get down to business here. People want to hear about the 1 seeds because these are the ones that people are like, wait, you didn't put this in there? It's like, no, it's in there. It's safely already in the automatic qualifier because a lot of people saw the bubble graphic and are like, wait, what about this game? So these are the top contenders as we see them for the 1 seeds. That doesn't mean these guys on the screen with me might not have an idea for a different one for the 1 seed. There were a couple mentions that we'll talk about, but UNC 2019, the 6 overtime game, Ohio State 2014, the win in the shoe, Florida State 2010, the ACC championship game. I've got the shirt on right now. Nebraska 2009, Tyrod did it. Miami 2004, our first ACC title, and Miami 2003, our highest ranked win ever. And 2 of those were for conference titles, but I think those are the top 6 games. And if you guys have a different opinion, please say it. But we got to pick 4 of those, correct, Clark? Because we're going to do 4 number 1 seeds.
Well, you got to have 4 number 1 seeds, but I mean, let's be honest here. UNC, Ohio State, Florida State, Nebraska, Miami. There's no Virginia games on this list. Not one.
That's because they're not good football teams.
They're not good. Yeah, they've
okay.
Never,
well, wait. So you say that
they had 1 year, right? 2007, where they were good. I think they were like 15th or 16th. I think that's in the automatic qualifying list. I think, right, as one of the top wins. But other than that year, UVA has not been a good team that we've played against.
So 2 UVA games that deserve a shot. Well, first of all, 2007. That was for the division showdown.
That was the biggest game, I feel like, in the rivalry's history at the time. One of the biggest. It was huge because
Tech was ranked number 8 and UVA was ranked number 16. But man, 38-0 in 2011.
Oh yeah.
I mean that was a Coastal Division title game as well.
It was. You are correct.
Obliterated Virginia.
Are you nominating that, Clark, for a 1 seed? Is that what you're trying to say here?
I think it's in the running.
All right,
sure.
We'll add it to the running.
Yeah.
We'll add it to the running.
Oh, this list is going to get pretty long. I'm concerned because I think
eight
takes.
8 games. I think if you add 07 UVA and 11 UVA, I think that's a good 8.
Well, what about Devin? Devin, what do you got?
See, I am going to tick off a lot of people because on my list, Ohio State 2014 is not a 1 seed. It's like It's like 6th overall, 6 or 7. I think we are doing a huge disservice. 1, to the 2007 Boston College game, the ACC title revenge.
Okay.
All my homies hate Matt Ryan. We all hate Matt Ryan. That game was sweet. And I really think, this is like, I know I'm young, but it's like, I've been going to games for a long time, relatively. We're not giving enough credit to West Virginia 04. That was big.
It rained.
They were 6th ranked.
It was the 2nd highest win in school history in terms of the ranking.
Yeah. We had lost. We lost to USC at the beginning of the year in FedEx Field. God, hate that stadium. We had lost to NC State on a last-second field goal. And if people remember, the media didn't think we'd be good. Like, we didn't think we'd be bad, but they weren't picking us to do well in the ACC. We were in like the bottom half. The year before, West Virginia derailed our perfect season, right? So the 03 Miami game is on there. What people forget sometimes is we went into that game like 6-1, 7-1. That one being the West Virginia loss, where they stomped us. They stomped us the year before. So getting West Virginia in 04 in our house, they're ranked 6th. We block the field goal. Vincent Fuller runs it all the way back for a touchdown. Defense holds on to it at the end. That's a 1 seed for me. It's like I could not believe that would not be a 1 seed.
And you can see it on the automatic qualifiers. WVU 2004, ranked number 6, payback for 2003, which that 2003 game that we lost was on a Wednesday. I don't know if you guys remember that.
I remember.
I thought it was a Thursday. I forgot it was a Wednesday.
I remember I was really little and I was watching it in my parents' bedroom for some reason. I don't know why I was in my parents' bedroom watching that game. And I was thinking to myself at like 6, 7 years old, whatever I was, like, okay, how can West Virginia lose points? Like, what can they do to not have points? Because there's no way our team is going to score points. That was a cruel awakening. I think that was like the first like bad loss that I consciously had as a fan of like, oh, my team lost a big game.
It was
not to bring the damper down.
03 WVU was devastating. I think 02 WVU got us as well.
Yep, they did. So 04 was just double revenge. And I was at that game. You know, I've been to all the home games pretty much since birth. So, and I remember that vividly, and it was loud. We talk about stadiums being loud. That field goal block where they're trying to get back into the game. I think Eric Green got the block. Vincent Fuller's the one who picks it up and returns it like 70, some odd 80 yards. Man, that's got to be a 1 seed for me.
Okay, so We got a bunch of gotta be a 1 seeds. We got UVA 2011, 2007, 2007 BC championship game, and WV 04 to add.
Devin, how can you not have the Ohio State game in the top? That
game
defines
I fully
the last
accept
15 years.
I fully accept that it's going to be a 1 seed.
Let's nominate that for a 1 seed now. It's a 1 seed for me.
I think that's a lock.
Okay, Ohio State. It's the third highest ranked win in school history. It was on the road in the shoe. We'll just. It was a wild upset for one.
It was,
and like I said, third highest ranked win in school history, and it was a master class by Michael.
It was
Brewer.
the largest crowd in Ohio Stadium history.
Yep, they had just installed lights. It was the first night game in Ohio State Stadium history.
Well, they had temporary lights.
This is true. Yeah, but they
I
permanent.
Think we could make the case that is the number 1 overall seed. I think but we're not going to go there because we don't really need to do that.
We'll do that next week.
Can someone nominate something that just has to be a number 1 seed on this list? What has to be a number 1 seed?
I would say Miami 2004 was, I think, beating Miami at Miami, and then Miami was just 18 months removed from one of, if not the best college football teams of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at the players who were on that Miami team and you look at how Tech won that game. It was gritty. It was, I hate that I said that word there, but it was they made that a slugfest game. And so I think that one was the welcome to big boy football moment for Virginia Tech. I know they had the national title run, but it was a bit Cinderella-ish coming from the Big East, and now that Tech and Miami are both in big-time football, I think that was one of the pendulums of Virginia Tech was going to kind of control up until 2010, 2012, and not Miami, like a lot of people thought.
So Tech had just won the Commonwealth Cup. They'd taken it back from UVA that week before, and it set up the de facto championship game. Miami was 6-1. Florida State was already in the house at 6-2, and Tech was 6-1 as well. So whoever won that game was going to win. Miami had the tiebreaker over Florida State, so Tech had to win the game to have just the better record at 7-1 overall. And that game was a slugfest. And Eddie Royal made a big play and caught a touchdown.
Eddie Royal taking a big play.
Eddie Royal, man. The Georgia Tech game in 04, but yeah, Eddie Royal. So, had they won that game, Miami would have, they would have played in major bowl games for 4 or 5 years at that point. Tech kind of took it away from Miami. And when did Miami play in the ACC championship after that point?
2017 was their first ACC, was their first Coastal Division title was 2017. And we talk about, the mistakes that the ACC made. That would have solidified their decision to put the ACC championship game in Florida, because it would have been Miami versus Florida State in the ACC championship game in the very first year. Or not the very first year, but it would have been Miami 1, Florida State 2. And then the next year, Miami beats us in 05. And we could have had a repeat of Miami versus Florida State, not necessarily a repeat, but Miami versus Florida State in the championship game. So it would have solidified their choice to have it in Tampa, or I think it was in Jacksonville in 05 was the first year, right?
Yeah. I was at that game too. This was one of the games that I was not at.
Yeah.
That we did the same thing you did, Pete. We drove down the morning of, watched the game, drove back. Insanity. I will never do that again.
Dude, that was the
airplanes exist, right?
Yeah. Well, we were college kids. We were broke.
Poor, man.
I have an uncle who hates flying, and he demanded to go. And what am I going to do? Leave him to drive by himself? We was like, man.
We drove my buddy's car, and I think 5 of us went in a CRV. It smelled so bad when we got back to Blacksburg. That's story for a different day.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let me talk about that Nebraska trip I made in a Honda Civic. But Miami 04 was not one of the games that I went to in our list. I remember that Eddie Royal catch. It was a play action pass, and Brian Randall put it on his fingertips, and he grabbed it on a slant pattern and ran to the corner of the end zone, and just the celebration, they knew that this was in reach.
The defense was lights out too.
The D-line, D-line dominated the end of that game. Jim Davis, I remember him. They batted passes down. They just owned Brock Berlin in that game at the end, and they were throwing oranges around.
Brock Berlin was on the receiving end of some abuse because Miami 2000
for several years.
Miami 2003. I went to the game, and everyone I know that went to that game and has gone to a lot of Tech games says that was the best game they've ever been to. Best sporting event they've ever been to, because I think that was the loudest I ever heard it. It was Halloween weekend. And like Sam was saying with regard to some of his games, I was a student at Tech, and it was the coolest, biggest thing that I had ever seen was 2003 Miami.
So Tech had just lost the week
prior
to West Virginia. And it killed the momentum. I mean, Tech was
killed
ranked
the
number
momentum,
3.
But it didn't kill the atmosphere.
No, it did not at all. But Tech was ranked number 3 in the nation when they lost to West Virginia. I mean, they were licking their wounds, but Miami was ranked number 2. So everybody knew this was still the game of the year.
And one loss was not a death sentence for a national championship possibility. We were still in the hunt, especially if, and we ended up beating a number 2 ranked Miami. Of course, the season fell off, the brakes fell off that year, but that's a time for another story. But yeah.
All right, so we need to
Miami had 39 regular season wins in a row at that point. Listen to some of the players that were on that team: Jarrett Payton, Roscoe Parrish, Kellen Winslow, Sean Taylor, Jonathan Vilma, Antrell Roll, Devin Hester.
We know
it's a who's who.
We know
Roscoe Miami when it was peak Miami.
They give it to me Roscoe line. Like I had to ask Bill Roth about it, because it's one of my favorite lines ever.
No
give it to me, Roscoe. Give it to me.
Yep.
And D'Angelo Hall took it right out of his hands and into the end zone.
Like,
why don't more players try to do that?
It was so easy.
So the first touchdown was that game. Was that
D'Angelo Hall? Yep.
Adding
to that,
Roscoe was the first touchdown.
Adding to the lore of that game, D Hall was talking so much trash.
That doesn't sound like him.
Both teams. Kellen Winslow.
Yeah, everyone was talking trash. But like one of the things that like always stuck with me, and this was early in my formative years when I was just starting to play football, just starting to play basketball, having my own dreams, right? One of the things he said when his trash talk, he's like, and I'm sure he didn't make it up. I'm sure it's been said, for decades ahead of time. But big time players make big time plays in big time games. And the first thing he does, the first points that go on the board, is him just stripping Roscoe by himself and taking it to the house. And it's like, oh, okay.
I mean, D'Angelo Hall, for all the good recruits that we had come through, and Vick and Kevin Jones, when D Hall got on campus, like, it was a big deal. And even though he became a good pro and everyone knows him from that, like, it was from day one. Like, he was playing both sides of the ball. I think he was number 7 for at the beginning of his career? That was Kevin Jones.
No, Kevin Jones was 7.
Yeah. And then he was 4. Yeah. But either way, he made plays from day one at Tech, and that one was one of the biggest. So I have a special place in my heart for Miami 2003. And Clark, you're absolutely right. That loss the week before was so killer, and I was crushed. And then that game, like, brought it all the way back. And that season didn't end well, but that game still stands alone in so many of me and my friends' minds as just an incredible game. We got 3.
It is the highest ranked team that Tech has ever beaten.
Right. It is.
Like, Tech's never beat number 1, but number 2 Miami that weekend, it's still right at the top. And they just beat the brains out of them. It was 31-0 in that game.
Oh, it was great.
And I remember there was those shirts, like, "It sucks to be you" after that, and like with a picture of Brock Berlin, I think, like on the ground, or it was like before GIFs were a thing, but like there was a video of it.
You're dating yourself, Pete. You're aging yourself. Hold on.
But so I will just add this. It's got hints of that Florida State 2018 in it.
This is true.
Absolutely.
In the next 5 games, Tech lost 4 of them, and they beat Temple on the road by 1 point in overtime because they missed an extra point, and it was not on television.
It was
that season just fell apart.
That was the
Tech
last
played some
game
bad
I listened to
teams
on the
before
radio.
that.
Yes,
yeah. Tech played some bad teams before that game. I mean, it was JMU before they were what JMU is now. Texas A&M, like we talked about, wasn't very good. UConn, Rutgers, Syracuse, and Central Florida. So it's like that might have been just a miracle night in Blacksburg.
So for anyone who's yelling at the podcast, like in their car, saying like, you need to mention this game about being a 1 seed, I'm going to mention a couple more. We're going to talk about the final 3 there on the list. Miami 2009 is a game that comes up for a lot of Tech fans. The top 10 win in a soaking rainstorm.
Pouring rain.
Yeah, I don't think it's a 1 seed, but it could go very far because people absolutely love that game. It was a game where the defense was being questioned quite a bit before that game. And Bud Foster like taped something to every locker. And then we just came out and destroyed Ja'Cory Harris. So I wanted to mention Miami 2009, just like Clark mentioned 2011 UVA and 2007 UVA. And then does UVA 2023 being the most points scored in the rivalry's history? And Clark, you talked about should we add that to just not that it's not going to be a 1, I don't think, but
no.
I think it could be up there just because of what it meant to this season and getting to a bowl and the scoring as many points as we did.
I think in the historical context of the discussion, this was a game that was a culmination of multiple years of struggle, and Tech just took it out on Virginia. Mm-hmm. They needed the win for a bowl game. There had not been a game quite like this. The Bashal Tootin kickoff return for a touchdown. I mean, I couldn't stop laughing. I mean,
Yep.
That's just how I felt.
They were playing the LED lights because they just got the field goal.
They just scored.
It was the straight up surrender field goal. You're losing 31-0. Yep. You're at like a 4th and 3 from the 7. All the analytics say go for it, and they're like, no, kick a field goal.
But it's still so fresh in our minds. I think it deserves to be on this list. No question. It deserves to be in the tournament. This is the most recent big win, but it was a big win. It meant a lot to the program. Is it a 1 seed? No, it's not.
It's not.
No. Okay. But it's in the list for sure. It has to be.
Let's talk about 2009 Nebraska in terms of being a 1 seed. Because of the way it ended, we all know that game wasn't good, but the opponent, the amount of fans they brought, that was, I think at the time, the most expensive ticket that I bought for a Virginia Tech game because they were so hard to get and I was no longer at school. And then the 2 of the most iconic plays in Virginia Tech school history at the end to win the game against Ndamukong Suh. And that's something that's kind of fun as we go through this. We talked about Russell Wilson, Chris Long being on the 2007 UVA team, and now Ndamukong Suh in this is Nebraska game and all those Miami players. Is Nebraska 2009 a number 1 seed?
I say yes. No question. And
it's on the. I would not be mad if it is, but it's on my bubble.
But here's the reason that I say this. Jeff Gluck, he's a writer for The Athletic. He covers NASCAR, and he does a poll every week that says, "Was this a good race poll?" And it is a simple yes or no answer. Yes, this game for the most part was just a defensive struggle, similar to the Texas A&M game in 2002. I mean, Ndamukong Suh dominated. The whole defensive line dominated. Tyrod couldn't do anything. But the last 2 minutes of that game will go down in the lore of Lane Stadium and Virginia Tech history. People left. People around us left.
They were leaving. They were leaving. I
remember that.
I stayed.
People had given up.
Just for the record.
I would like to say that I went back and did a lot of research, and I read Will Stewart's column from Tech Sideline. And Will, first of all, they have all their articles logged in their system, so it was great to go back through. But Will left. People they'd given up. I mean, they'd gone 4 and out, but the coaching staff had saved all 3 of their timeouts, and they called all 3 of them and forced a pooch punt, and Tech got the ball one last time, and that was all they needed.
Yep.
And it's Nebraska also had 40 yards of penalties on one drive that kicked them. They had a 1st and goal, and they ended up punting.
Wow.
That would have won the game for Nebraska.
I had forgotten about that one.
Yep. And also, going back, I was watching highlights of the game afterwards. I also was at that game, and for the record, I did not leave as well. It was a defensive breakdown, is why Danny Cole was that wide open. It wasn't even like it happens often like that when games come down to the wire like that. But it wasn't like some great play design or an athlete out athleting another athlete. It was straight up breakdown. And then Danny Cole racing to the end zone, and he gets taken out at the 3 or 1 yard line. And then we have the Tyrod Diddy Mikey to Daryl Roberts.
Any game that has that signature Bill Roth call, man, like it just gives you chills.
I think it's the 2 Miami games, Ohio State, and this one, and then I think your top 2 seed is that FSU 2010 national title game.
The national or the ACC title?
The ACC title game.
My top 4 were BC 2007, West Virginia. Well, sorry, West Virginia 04 is 1. No, West Virginia 04 is 2. BC 2007 was my 1. If there is an overall number 1. Okay. Miami 03, give it to me, Roscoe, and FSU 2010 ACC title. Is on my top 4.
Okay, before we just kind of go through that 4 thing like we did with the bubble, I did want to say we did a memory lane episode last year with Danny Cole about that game. We did a game rewind about the Nebraska game where Danny Cole was on the show, and his analysis of his catch and everything was absolutely incredible. So I would, for our listeners that are out there, go back and listen to that. But not only did we get the legendary Bill Roth call, we got he's running out of time. Yeah, I mean, we got multiple calls from multiple sources from that game. So I think Nebraska, for me, has to be in the top 4. But we haven't talked in any length about FSU 2010 or UNC 2019. I want to talk about UNC 2019. It was a game I couldn't attend. It was a game that I watched in Hawaii on my honeymoon. I did not have a fall wedding. It just so happened that we delayed our wedding into October. And Devon got the pleasure of recapping that game as the co-host on Too Deep. So
with my terrible mic, I do.
It sounded great. It was fine. And you and Robbie did a great job with it. But longest game in ACC history. We had beaten Miami that year to kind of start to turn the season around with Hendon Hooker in 2019. But we had Rhode Island the week before UNC. And so that UNC game in a lot of ways was going to solidify the turnaround. And if we lose it, Fuente immediately turns back to on the hot seat because we had gotten blown out by Duke early in the year, looked terrible against Furman, all the rest of it. And then we also essentially won that game, not only in 6 overtimes, but with our backup quarterback.
Backup quarterback.
Backup quarterback. Exactly. Quincy was 3rd string at the start of the year.
Thank you. And so we're talking about lore. That game has lore in droves. Was UNC amazing? No. Were we kind of amazing? No. But from the way that season was playing out and everything that went into it and being 6 overtimes and all that kind of stuff and just kind of going from, wasn't that like a light to dark game in terms of like the sun setting?
It was a 3:30 game. And because the game was so long, it went until like 8, 9 o'clock.
Yes.
Yeah. Long game.
And so there has to be a case for it to be a 1 seed. There has to be a case for it. And that's the case. Can someone talk a little bit about the FSU 2010 game? And then we can kind of close this out, picking our 4.
I can take it. Because I went to that with my dad, and Barrick and the whole crowd. We went down to that game. That was the first ACC championship game in Charlotte, if I remember right. FSU's
you're right.
It was either their first or second year with Jimbo. I'm trying to remember because Bobby Bowden was still there in 07 and 08. I don't know if he was there in 09 or not. So FSU has their new coach, right? That Bobby Bowden handpicked, and so they're riding high, right? They had a decent team that year, not like fantastic, but he's young, or not young, but he's a new coach. So they're thinking it's Florida State's time, right? Like they had their down period in the 2000s after dominating the 90s. 2010's a new decade. They're in the ACC championship game and they're going to dominate, right? Virginia Tech comes in having not made the ACC championship game in 09, but having back-to-back before that. We're trying to re-solidify ourselves as, no, we're the class of the ACC. You still got to go through us. And as Pete alluded to and Clark alluded to in some of the other 2010 games where we were talking about in the bubble qualifiers, this was our we had to win this game to get the undefeated season for an ACC team, which had not happened since the expansion and had not happened since Florida State in 2000, if I remember correctly. So the lead up to it was the old guard trying to reclaim its throne and the new guard trying to hold on to it. So then you get to the game, and there's so many great plays. There was the Justice Gavea-Winslow tipped interception going into the end zone. I believe it was tipped by Bruce Taylor,
who was injured in that game.
He was. Yep. I think it was literally the next series he goes out and doesn't come back in. I can't remember, but
it was early. Yeah.
Okay.
We hung out with Bruce Taylor last time we were in Blacksburg together there, Devin.
Bruce is at every game. Yeah,
he goes to a lot of them. Yep, he's got an RV if you ever can catch him. It's a fun road trip. But then Tyrod is, of course, again we're talking about, like, to me that game is big because it's solidifying a lot of things. It's solidified Tech of this decade was ours. We're dominating. Tyrod solidified his ACC Player of the Year candidacy. We got a taste. We had already gotten taste of it, to be fair, but we got a taste of what David Wilson was going to be, because that was the last year we had, the three, Ryan Williams, Darren Evans, and David Wilson. But in that game, I believe David Wilson scored 2 touchdowns, 1 rushing, 1 receiving. Prior to that game, all of his touchdowns, except for the Marshall game, I think, had been those kickoff return touchdowns. So we got a little taste of what was to come next. There was a lot of insults being thrown Jimbo Fisher's way towards the end of the game because they were down 2 scores. And he's calling timeouts with a minute left, still trying to win. And we were like, come on, man. Really? And then, of course, being in Charlotte, I know a lot of people down there, so we had so much fun before the game, after the game. Thankfully,
it was a great weekend.
I lived in Charlotte at that time, yeah.
And
I was down
I always forget what that tower is. The tower that they have in the backdrop of the stadium was
Bank of America.
Bank of America. So it was lit up with Florida State and Virginia Tech colors in the backdrop of the stadium, right? So it's a 1 seed for me. Just the lead up to it, like I said, the old guard and the new guard butting heads. Who's gonna be reign supreme? Now, of course, at the end of the day, it ends up being FSU does get their hold back on the ACC. They win it 2 years in a row, win a national championship in there as well, and go to another playoff right after. But
and so did Clemson, yeah.
And so did Clemson. But at the time, the thought was no, Virginia Tech is holding on. We're not letting go that easily.
There's a picture on Facebook somewhere of me having fall down in the bleachers of that 2010 FSU championship game. Again, the shirt that I have on right now, champs. If I can find that picture, I'll post it later.
That game was Tyrod's swan song. I mean, yes, they had the Stanford Orange Bowl, but man, Stanford just owned Tech that night. But that was Tyrod's night.
It was his legacy night. Yeah,
he had 3 touchdowns passing, and then he had that sweet run where he rolled to his right. He rolled to his right, missed a tackle. Another guy went to make a tackle, and he just walked right into the middle of the end zone. I mean, that was Tyrod's. Thank you for everything, Tyrod. I mean, that was so wonderful just to see Tech get that ACC championship and beat a Florida State team that seemed to own Tech for a long time, and Tech just destroyed them that night. And it was all Tyrod.
With the season, the way it started that year, it was a minor setback for a major comeback, right? That was
right there.
Exactly.
I love those jerseys. I know a lot of people don't, but
they're so sick. They're so sick.
I love those jerseys.
The details in that jersey are spectacular.
People don't like them is because we lost in them. So I think if we had won in them,
I don't like them because can you read 5? Because it's hard to read.
Well, it was an
stands,
ode
it was
to
not
our
easy
Tech
to read
background,
numbers.
having the circuit board within the.
We're talking about wins, so let's get back to wins.
Yeah. All right. We got to pick these 4 1 seeds. We have 2, Ohio State and Miami 2004. We have solidified as 2 of our ones. We need to get 2 more. And so I think Nebraska is the next one up in terms of, do we think, does anyone feel really strongly that Nebraska needs to be a 1 seed?
Yes, I do.
I do not.
I do. The game was bad, but the finish, it has a name.
Can I ask you a question, Clark? I would just like to ask. So if you were to compare the 04 West Virginia game and the 09 Nebraska game right now on your X as a bracket, which one would you vote for?
Nebraska.
I think I'd vote for Nebraska.
Yes.
How is the young guy in this group picking the 04 West Virginia game? That doesn't make sense.
Well, you're like me. Like, I remember, games in the early 90s. So it's like but I would tell you, old guard, new guard, anybody who was at that game, anybody who was watching thought Tech was dead. Tech had lost the game. They had beat Nebraska the year prior. They were splitting the series. And somehow in the last 2 minutes, the miracle in Blacksburg, it has a name. It has a call. Like that game in itself.
Tyrod did it, Mikey. I think it has to be a 1. Sam, you were going to say something. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I think that game also set up Tech beating a top 10 Miami team the next week.
That is true.
So,
yep.
I mean, that for me, I understand it was a crappy game, but I mean, it's Virginia Tech football. It's not necessarily the prettiest thing on earth.
It's not always
pretty. Well, you don't remember any. I don't remember anything but the last 2 minutes. I mean,
yeah,
it's been
because nothing. Literally, nothing. It was just
years.
It doesn't matter because
so I think this is the number 4 overall seed, and I would put 03 Nebraska as the number. I mean, 03 Miami is the number 3 overall seed.
Oh, okay. See, Sam, I love this because you're by far the youngest man on this podcast, picking one of the oldest games, and I absolutely love that because I think Miami 03. It'd be weird. Like that means we'd have 2 1 seeds as Miami. I don't think that matters. We have to pick what we consider the best.
It was the context of the game.
Yeah,
it was winning down at Miami. Yeah. Tech had not had a game-winning drive.
He's talking about 03. 04 is in. 04 is a 1.
Okay. 04 is in.
You were saying that 03 should also be in.
I agree.
03 should also be a top.
I think 03 should be a 1 seed.
All right, sweet. Yeah. Then so we have 1 spot left, fellas, and that 1 spot can go to Nebraska. It can go to FSU 2010. Which of those 2? Which one is the best win of those 2? Nebraska. They're in your bracket. Nebraska, FSU 2010.
You know my vote. It's Nebraska. People talk about that game still.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's.
If you walk up to a random Tech fan and say, "You remember much about that Florida State game?" No, I don't remember. I just know that Tyrod played really well and they won the ACC championship. You remember that Nebraska game? I remember that. I remember where I was when I was watching that game.
All right, so UNC 2019 or Nebraska? It's Nebraska.
Hands down.
I still pick
UNC was quite the roller coaster, but
that was a great game. I sold the UNC 2019 game. I sold my side ticket to my class president, which was both a great decision and a terrible mistake because I always saw him so prim and proper and dressed up and straight back, and he came to tailgate with me, and the game's going, and he is so far gone. And the game just keeps going and going. There's a blocked field goal. There's a missed field goal. I think there's another blocked field goal or a blocked PAT at one point. Both teams missed the first the 2-point conversion attempts because that was the first year with the new rule, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just trading 2-point conversions back and forth.
Fourth overtime.
Fourth overtime. Okay, yeah. Okay. So it's just, but USC is not Nebraska.
It's not.
And that Nebraska team won 10 games that year.
Yeah, they were a good team. Yeah. They were a good team. They damn near beat Texas in the championship game of the Big 12, who went on to play in the national championship. So that game he was ragdolling Colt McCoy all over the field that game. But anyway, so Nebraska beats UNC. Nebraska beats FSU 2010. And Devin, I do appreciate the WVU 2004 and the BC 2007 championship game. Both are great. But I think if this is the cream of the crop, and I think it's got to be, are we in agreement that Nebraska is the 4th 1 seed here?
I will concede. Yes.
I think so.
And I appreciate you conceding.
I will defend
we do have
that
to
game
cut this
all
thing
day.
off. We're an hour and 46 in, so we got to do this. So we got Ohio State 2014, right. Miami 2004, Miami 2003, and Nebraska 2009. Those are our 4 1 seeds. So many good games are going to be fighting for 2s and 3s, and that is what we're going to do in the next show. That is the goal, is that we are going to seed the teams. Hopefully it won't be this long, but who knows, because it's very fun when you start talking about
these games, man.
And just
all I have to say is I hope Nebraska does not have to go up against 04 West Virginia in the bracket. March Madness is all about upset.
Maybe we should pair them up.
First round? Oh no.
Nah, it would be first round.
Okay.
Maybe we can make them in the same region. How about that?
Oh yeah. Do some conspiracy backroom deals there.
That's right.
For the people watching on YouTube, I have the automatic qualifiers up on the screen. We did not remove any of those games. They all stayed automatic, and we added Clemson 2006, UVA 2015, FSU 2018, LSU 2002, and then we chose our 1 seeds. And they were Ohio State 2014, Nebraska 2009, 04 Miami, 03 Miami, And people are probably going to be a little upset. Whatever. We did the best we could. We talked about so many games tonight. Thank you guys for being here. And we will be back soon with a part 2 of this memory lane exercise, which is so difficult, but we had we had some really, so you guys brought the heat, man. You brought the information, you did your homework. Devon, Clark, thank you so much. Like I really appreciate you joining me and Sam and helping us out on this. We might have a couple other guys helping us out on the next episode, and you won't want to miss that one. But I'll see you. Thank you guys. Until next time, go Hokies.
Cheers.
Go